Wednesday, October 15th, and it is certainly an open meeting for those that are visiting are welcome to come in, so we expect some of our guests to come in as we speak. Hello. I might just wait a minute while people settle themselves. I'm on.
No, I think there's 3 people presenting.
Can I talk to you about this? Because I just had mine last week. Yeah. No, I'll let my neighbors know. I need one more. Probably next week. That's fine. So you're retro.
All right, I've just we just gave a moment for our guests to come in. I'm glad we have extra chairs. Welcome. I'm Charlie, Chair of the Metropolitan Council, and this is a regular committee of the whole Wednesday where we meet in our committee meeting. It's a little less formal, but you're welcome to public process to witness this meeting. Before I call it to order, I'll just mention that although this is kind of a committee meeting, we're carrying over an item from last week's formal committee Metropolitan Council meeting, which I'm sure many of our guests are here to witness. So welcome, and I'm happy that you could fit in here. Sorry we don't have as much space, but we're one happy family, so it's good to get right to business. So I'll call this meeting to order. First item is the approval of the agenda, and unless there are any changes to the agenda, I will assume that the agenda is approved. And on to the minutes from our last committee of the whole, which was February 1st. And may I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
I'll move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, corrections?
Yeah, I was present the last meeting, doesn't show me present on that one, so we're gonna take the record on that.
We absolutely want to get that right. Thank you, Councilmember Sterner. Any other corrections? All right, with that correction, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. As I mentioned, we have a business item that carried over from last week. And we are actually allowed under our bylaws to have a time-critical business item in the committee of the whole, which normally we don't conduct actual business, but we are in this case, and we're allowed to do that. We are not, there's rules that were applying last week or applying now. We're not actually having testimony. We're not having public comment, but we do have a business item that was on the agenda last week. We're going to take it up again, and I know that we have some presentations, which we really welcome, and we look forward to that. So, with that, I will ask that we go to our first business item. item 2023-15. It was originally considered February 8th, and we adopted a motion to postpone the business item until February 15th, Committee of the Whole. That's today. So I'll start off by calling on Councilmember Barber.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-15 is to adopt the bus and rail agency safety plans as required by federal regulation. This is the business item we began discussing at our February 8th, 2023 meeting. The Metropolitan Council last approved the agency safety plans in July 2022 as part of the required annual update. The agency safety plans are coming back for us now because federal rules required that the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee approve the plan by December 31st, 2022. That triggers the need for the Metropolitan Council to approve the plan again. The Joint Labor Management Safety Committee is a new committee required by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The federal rules require the formation of a Joint Labor Management Safety Committee by July 31st, 2022, and for that safety committee to approve the plans by December 31st, 2022. The Joint Labor Management Safety Committee was formed on July 31st, 2022 as required by law. At the committee's November 4th, 2022 meeting, they agreed to review and provide comments on agency safety plans by November 30th. These plans were updated based on the feedback received by the agreed upon November 30th deadline. There were a few technical or administrative changes recommended by management representative by the deadline, but aside from those technical changes, the plans did not change from the July 2022 version. The council is being asked to approve revision 4 of these plans today in line with the federal requirements, but it is important to know that these are living documents. As was discussed at the Transportation Committee and at last week's council meeting, these plans must be updated at least annually. And Metro Transit has stated they're open to making changes before the next annual revision based on input from the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee. That means the Safety Committee can start working on Revision 5 now, and that plan will come back for us when it's ready for approval. Additionally, at Transportation Committee, Metro Transit committed to bringing the Transportation Committee quarterly updates on the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee's work. When the Safety Committee updates come to Transportation Committee, I've asked that a labor representative from the committee participate in presenting these quarterly updates. So there will continue to be opportunities to discuss and to revise these plans after today and before the next required update. But we must approve these plans at this point to make sure we're compliant with federal rules. This is important to ensure we are not at risk of jeopardizing federal funding. With that, Chair Zelli, I request that you recognize a couple of our personnel from Metro Transit to present.
Thank you. I will also, just to kind of repeat what Councilmember Barber said, that you are making a motion.
I can do that now if you'd like, yeah?
I think that'd be good.
All right, therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt Revision 4 of the Bus Transportation Agency Safety Plan and the Light Rail Transportation Agency Safety Plan for Metro Transit as required by 49 CFR Part 673.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Benton. I think Councilmember Barber in this motion is taking the motion we had last week and putting it on the floor. But we're gonna hear a presentation about what's happened this last week and really try to get some understanding, sense of this committee to kind of make sure that what we are voting on is the safety plan as required by federal law in existence on December 31st of 2022. Having said that, there's also been meetings with the safety committee to in good faith, understand that we want to make improvements after that plan and to improve that plan with labor input going forward. That makes sense? Okay, just so we all know where we are. And I think Interim General Manager Leslie Canvas, are you starting us off?
Yes. Actually, all three of
Please
us
come
will come
forward.
up at once.
And please introduce your other presenters.
Thank you, Chair Zelli, council members. I'm Leslie Kinderis. I'm currently serving as the interim general manager at Metro Transit, and I'm joined by Andrew Brody, Metro Transit's director of safety, and Ron Kamuller, who serves as the labor co-chair for the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee. Thank you for allowing us to come before you today as you consider business item 2023-15, which is the approval of revision 4 of the agency safety plans. We listened to last week's discussion and appreciate this opportunity today to both further address some of the questions that were raised at the last meeting and also to provide an update on the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee following their meeting this past Friday. On that first part, addressing some of the questions and issues that were raised last week, Andrew Brody is going to provide a brief overview of the federal requirements that pertain both to the agency safety plans as well as the new Joint Labor Management Safety Committee requirement. And part of what we want to convey today is that the agency safety plans are one important component of our work on safety, but they are far from the only document or the only process that we have at Metro Transit for mitigating risks and improving safety on our system. After the brief overview on the federal requirements, Mr. Brody and Mr. Kamuller are going to provide an update on the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee. Part of what we heard last week is the Metropolitan Council is really interested in more information about where this work is going and what the plan is for the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee moving forward. So Mr. Brody and Mr. Kamuller are going to report on the progress that's been made since your last council meeting on that front. And just ultimately, as I continue to hear from Mr. Brody, we want to recognize that the work of improving safety and strengthening safety is really about culture change. And as such, being about culture change, it's really about involving all of our employees in that work. And we feel this Joint Labor Management Safety Committee is just one more important tool and venue to form that partnership. And just really want to reiterate what Councilmember Barber shared when she introduced this business item, that this is a living document. We can start revision 5 immediately. The action before you, as the chair laid out, is really to ratify the fact that we had revision 4 completed by the December 31st, 2022 deadline. But we are really eager as this committee continues to develop, to partner with them on this work moving forward. So with that, Andrew is going to start off with a presentation, and Mr. Kamuller will join when we get to the update from the committee.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon, council members. Good afternoon, everybody. I do have a presentation I'd like to pull up as of right now. Get that pulled up. Well, while they're pulling it up, again, my name is Andrew Brody. I'm the Director of Rail and Bus Safety. Just going to go through a few slides on the approving responsibilities of the agency safety plan. What are the agency safety plan regulatory requirements? What is SMS, Safety Management Systems? And like General Manager Kinderis said, a status update on our Joint Labor Management Safety Committee.
So they can see the
Oh, so
PowerPoint.
we
can't,
So you can all-
people attending.
I think we're putting up the.
Thank you.
Somebody wants to sing a song? Oh, there you go. That's good.
I'm sure. we go.
Uh-huh.
All right, so again, my name is Andrew Brody, Director of Bus Safety, and Ron Kamueller joins me from co-chair from the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee. I guess I'm in control here. So again, the business item that is called to your attention here tonight is 2023-15, proposed action that the Metropolitan Council adopt revision 4 of the Bus Transportation Agency Safety Plan and the Light Rail Transportation Agency Safety Plan as required by 49 CFR Part 673. And this is a requirement as the Board of Directors, the Metropolitan Council approve it is just one step towards certifying that Metro Transit has established this Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan regulatory requirement as required by 49 CFR Part 673. The next slide here is just a snapshot out of our current agency safety plan that the council approved back in July. So this is a page actually within the light rail agency safety plan. The bus one looks very similar, but as I point out there, the for rail mode only, that's the State Safety Oversight Office that signs off. So at the top there, I know it's kind of small, but you'll see a retired General Manager Wes Koistra signed off on it as the accountable executive, and then myself as the Chief Safety Officer for Metro Transit, and then the State Safety Oversight Office again for light rail mode only, and then approved by the governing body, which would be the council, and that just has the date in there as to when the meeting was, and then the meeting minutes is what we use to prove that it was approved. And then the last one there, we put in there as kind of a placeholder for the July annual update for the Joint Labor Safety Management Committee, and as you can see there, it says TBD, to be determined. So this revision 4 would be December 22nd, 2022. So just getting into more of the responsibilities of what each individual, including the council body, is supposed to, how they approve. So accountable executive, this is regulatory language, so I apologize for the dryness, but just want to kind of share everybody's understanding of how the approval process works, who has to approve it, and what we're approving. So it's a single identified person who is ultimately responsible for carrying out the PTAS SMS of a public transit agency and control or direction over the human and capital resources needed to develop and maintain the agency's PTAS in accordance with 49 USC 5329D and 49 CFR Parts 625.5 and 673.5. So the accountable executive's responsibility is to sign the agency safety plan and subsequent updates and ensure implementation of the PTAS regulatory requirements that were came to us in 2018 and required in 2019. Ensure agency's SMS is implemented effectively and that the action is taken to address substandard performance, and also to designate a chief safety officer or an SMS executive for the day-to-day SMS operation. Next slide. So accountable executive, I missed this, sorry about this, back up a little bit. For Metro Transit is the general manager, so in this case, interim Leslie Kinderis would be our accountable executive. The Public Transit Agency Safety Plan requirements, so again, a few regulatory requirements here. So the FTA requirements that were in front of us with the bipartisan infrastructure, that by July 31st, 2022, the transit agency that receives Section 5370 funding, which is the federal funding that we all receive, and serves a large urbanized area, unurbanized area with a population of 200,000 or more, must establish a safety committee compliant with 49 USC, again 5329D5. And we did this with ATU members inputted, and that was completed on July 31st, 2022. The other requirement with the bipartisan infrastructure was once established, the safety committee should begin to work and meet as soon as practical to approve our agency safety plans by December 31st, 2022. This was done, the revision 4 was completed, and comments were due by November 30th, as Councilmember Barber mentioned prior. And the following meeting, which was December 22nd, 2022, we reviewed those changes and completed that at that time. And it's virtually unchanged with some administrative changes from revision 3 that was approved by the council in July or July 27th, 2022, which was our annual updates that was required. That was just when it was due, so that's why we updated it at that time. So Labor Management Safety Committee, what are their responsibilities? So as we've already stated, approve the agency safety plan, any updates prior to the Board of Directors and Metropolitan Council approval. So it has to come to you after the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee has reviewed it and approved it. But there's also other important items that the committee must do. And that is to identify and recommend risk-based mitigations and strategies necessary to reduce the likelihood and severity of consequences identified through the agency safety risk assessment. The other item is identify mitigations or strategies that may be ineffective, inappropriate, or not implemented as intended, and identify safety deficiencies for purpose of continuous improvement. And again, I listed the source there from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So safety at Metro Transit, like General Manager Leslie Conderas mentioned, the agency safety plans are just one piece of many safety-related documents within Metro Transit. We have the required MIN-OSHA, a workplace accident injury reduction program, also known as AWARE, that many of you are probably familiar with. Employee safety programs that the safety department is responsible for, and review on the required intervals, which includes the lockout, tag, fall protection, etc. We have emergency action plans for our facilities that essentially is plans to ensure that our employees are safe within the facilities, whether it be tornado, active shooter, fire, whatever it may be, and those are reviewed on an annual basis as well. Bus operations emergency management plan. We have our safety and security action plan that comes to this committee that you all are well versed in. And the transportation safety and security committee that we have, that is a committee that is also chaired by management and ATU members. Light rail operations emergency management plan. It's a systems security, sorry, I'm able to see there. Systems security emergency preparedness plan that Metro Transit PD actually has that, and the North Star system program plan that is for the North Star operation. So, agency safety plan. So what is an ASP needs to support in the operation of Metro Transit? It needs to be viable, right? It needs to be practical, healthy, capable of growth. It needs to be flexible. It must be able to be modified, like we've mentioned before. It needs to be accurate. It needs to reflect what we do, not what we want to do. And it also needs to be useful. It cannot be unwieldy and cumbersome that it can't be used in the point of its intended, which we'll get to the point of which it's intended. The ASP also includes the collective and review of all transit department procedures and rules, not just operations, not just maintenance, not just facilities, it's all of us. Reflects the agency's practice. It's reviewed and updated at a minimum annually, as we mentioned, to continuously improve the safety performance and implementation of Metro Transit safety management systems. And also prioritize hazards for risk-based, right? So you want those higher risk items prioritized at the top. And also not only the highest risk items, but typically, with an SMS system, the things that you can, what am I trying to say, the low-hanging fruits, the things that are easy to do, we definitely can do as well, not just the highest priority ones. So what is the agency safety plan? As mentioned in previous slide a little bit, FTA, it's a required regulatory FTA document for Metro Transit's documentation of the safety management system and its 4 components. So that's extremely important within a safety management system. You have to have safety policy, which documents our commitment to safety right from the accountable executive, and it has key performance indicators in that. And then our safety risk management process, which I always look at as kind of the meat and potatoes of your safety risk management or your safety management system, rather. That's where you're identifying, assessing risk, and mitigating them. Your safety assurance is ensuring that your risk mitigation is working. Also, it's where your audit program, your internal audit program lies. And then safety promotion is training, things that we do for operators when they're have their safety awards, things like that. Those are all examples of safety promotion. So all very important things, but that's to document how we do those things. It also documents FTA required safety, I already covered that, I apologize. FTA required safety performance indicators as required by the FTA PTAS regulatory requirements. So it is our framework outlining how Metro Transit processes hazards identified within the system. It defines Metro Transit's risk matrix based off of likelihood and severity to consequences to hazard. So what is it? What is it not? So it's not a document that we would document all the mitigation strategies in. That's what our SOPs are for. That's what other manuals are for that frontline employees are actually going to review and read on a daily basis. It's checklists, it's whatever it may be. That's where the mitigation strategies really need to be documented and implemented. It's not the only document for safety of Metro Transit, as we've covered. It's not an executable plan to reduce personal safety from the system. It's not replacing or any governing OSHA mandated safety plans or committees such as the AWARE committee. So a few of you may be wondering, well, what is SMS? You've mentioned it many times in this presentation already, so I have a couple of slides here to kind of briefly overview that. I could talk all night long about SMS and you guys would all be probably asleep. But so SMS is a compromised collaborative approach that brings management and employees together to build on the transit industry's existing safety foundation. That's why we're here today. That's what we're trying to do with the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee. It's control your safety risk better, right? We can't eliminate all risk. If we eliminated all risk, none of us would be sitting here today. We'd be all in different jobs. Detect and correct safety problems early. So part of SMS is going from reactive to proactive, looking at data, looking at areas where things could occur before they occur, and share and analyze safety data more effectively, measure safety performance more carefully. And then the FTA's definition of SMS means the formal top-down organization-wide data-driven approach to manage safety risk and ensuring the effectiveness of safety risk mitigations. It includes systematic policies, procedures, and practices for the management of safety risks. So again, the ultimate goal of an SMS is to ensure that the agency has an inclusive and effective process to direct resources to optimally manage safely. So getting into the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee status updates, I'll turn it over to Mr. Camuller here in a little bit, but very positive. I want you all to know that. It was a very positive meeting from when we all met last Wednesday. I was very pleased with it. We got, I feel like, a lot covered in an hour and a half. I didn't know if an hour and a half would be enough time. We did get reoccurring 90-minute meetings on the calendar weekly, so we meet weekly every Thursday now until March 9th, I believe. Oh yeah, it's up on the screen. I should just stick to the script. Reoccurring 90-minute weekly meetings scheduled through March 9th. And then also, already on the calendar, we've decided to meet every third Thursday from 2 to 3:30 as well. So not only weekly meetings, but we've already put on the calendar every third Thursday of every month. So we're committing to that. It's out there. It's on people's calendars. We're aware of it. It's not going to be anything new. It's not going to be a frantic, oh, we got to get a meeting on the calendar. It's there. And that's one of the biggest issues that I had, because as many of us all know, things can become a priority. And then if you don't have it in your calendar, it never happens. So that was the biggest thing, to get it down and make sure it happens. We've selected members to provide quarterly updates for the Transportation Committee. So Ron Camuller and myself will be coming to the Transportation Committee and providing quarterly updates to that committee to ensure that the Transportation Committee is comfortable with what's going on. And then the biggest thing right now is, the next biggest thing is review the bylaws that were tabled due to the ATU coming with addendum items for the agency safety plans that I will turn over to Mr. Camuller.
Well, thank you. I want to be respectful of your time here, so I won't get deep, but I do want to thank Andrew on behalf of the safety department. He has been extremely easy to work with. We spent a lot of time working through things over the last couple of weeks. I want to assure you that I, on behalf of the union, have great faith in this man's ability to do what we need to do here. With that said, what we did agree to, what you're looking at is titled an addendum. Because of the hard work and the I don't know what the word I want, the frankness with which and the speed with which we accomplished this, the union has agreed to, we will open revision 5 immediately, and we will get to work on that and get that done as soon as we can. I just want to take a minute and take you through kind of the highlights of the agreement. We started off in a place where we felt the company was unilaterally trying to do this, appointing a chairman. That was easily resolved. We're going to have co-chairs. Both the company has agreed to give us signatory authority and signing off the plan, so we actually get to put a signature on it. That's very important to us. Andrew went over the schedule, so I guess there's no point in that. I want to touch on safety first. I think Leslie said that it was a culture shift. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe the term culture shift was used. We feel very strongly that that's what needs to happen here. Safety has got to be a priority. That rests with Mr. Brody. He's the director of safety. The way it works here is the safety department is a separate chain of command, separate from management. We really want to work towards safety trumps all. It has to be first, or there, in my opinion, there is no safety. And we're working hard towards that. We're making daily gains, so thank you. Now, I just want to take you through some of the things that we brought forward that are very important to the union. Our number one priority is the assaults on the operators. I know this plan is for transit workers. We're concerned with the public as well. We're concerned with everybody. Some of the things that we think are important, and we've agreed that this will be the first order of business. We want prompt and full investigations. We'd like to see adequate time off for the transit workers to recover after they're assaulted. We'd like to see the psychological support for the transit workers who suffer assaults we just have to address that. How we do that with professional people, you know, what that looks like exactly, I can't tell you, but we've agreed to do that. And we really would like to see quicker responses to PRT calls, silent alarms, MDTs, or calls for help. Basically, that is calls for help. Our folks are feeling abandoned when something happens. Nobody comes. And we've agreed we're going to work towards those strategies to mitigate those. Infectious disease is high on our list. Not only does that mean like COVID, but we mean like the smoking of narcotics. You know, that's up like 182%, I think this committee heard back on the 18th of January. So the things we'd like to see sanitary standards established, including testing intervals and proper cleaning and disinfecting standards, and proper trainings for employees for infectious diseases, chemicals, and biohazards, i.e. meth and other narcotic contamination on transit vehicles. We'd like to see the immediate removal of these transit vehicles from service in the event of exposure to narcotics or biohazards. We'd like to reestablish the barrier committee. We want to do that because I think all the buses have some version of a barrier, but they don't all have the barrier that protects the operator. Some of these are still they're referred to as sneeze shields. And there's problems with these things. there's glare issues which affect the operator's ability to safely operate. There's, banging and clanging, and we just feel we really need to go back to that. We'd like to see PPE should be issued to the workers in their mailbox, and they should be trained on proper use. We just want to make sure it's available to everybody right out of the gate. The right to know training, that's what that is in a nutshell, is the training you get initially when you come on board, and then annually you get a recurrent version of that. We'd like to visit that because we don't feel that what's going on is really accomplishing the intended purpose. We believe that there should be a hands-on training component here, and whatever else this committee can agree to improve this. Training and reporting really are our big concerns here. And I think this will help address that. And I think that's it. But I just want to leave you with, I really believe that we can, I'm very confident in Mr. Brody. If we can get to where safety is first, I believe a lot of other things are going to fall into place. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your comments, Ron and Andrew and Leslie. And we can have an opportunity to open it up for any comments or questions from Councilmember Leslie.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Kamler. Thanks, Mr. Brody, all of y'all for this work. This is just really encouraging to see, and it's nice to see getting to shape that can be presented as an addendum. And it's good to hear the positive comments about the cooperative work that's going on, so thank you for that as well. I had just a technical question about one of the provisions that are laid out in this addendum, and it's the first point under infectious diseases, and it says including testing intervals, and I'm hoping that you can please just educate me about what's being tested and what a ideal interval would be.
Well, sir, I think that's something we need to work through, but I'm a maintenance foreman in the Green Line shop. So when these trains, what this means to me is something happens on the train, they pull it off the line, it comes in, they clean it. The guys clean them overnight. It seems to me that the things that go on that train are disgusting. They're vomiting, they're peeing, they're smoking drugs, all sorts of other things. During COVID, we were disinfecting. I don't know that that's going on anymore. So the concern is, I don't know what's in there. I think we should have an idea of what's in there. And then we should deal with what's in there. So.
I think if I may, Mr. Kamler, so it's testing what might be on a train. It's not testing the overall train for cleanliness, it's testing individual, so you know what kind of, whatever substances you're dealing with. Is that what testing means?
Right, I mean,
Okay.
if somebody vomits in your house, you clean that up to a certain standard.
Right.
We don't know, we really don't know.
Okay.
What we're saying is we need standards, and we need to know exactly what it is we're dealing with.
Thank you.
If that, I hope
It
that
does,
answers
it
the
does.
question.
Councilmember Chambliss, then Park.
Thank you. I want to say that I'm very encouraged by having 2 council meetings where we have such great attendance from ATU. Our strategic plan, one of the priorities in our strategic plan is to have engagement. Also, another item that's a priority in the Met Council strategic plan is to have continuous improvement. And I think this type of engagement is going to go a long way to getting us there, collaborating together. I do have a question, Chair, and that is, how many people attended the February 10th meeting?
Andrew?
Chair and council members, I could definitely get back to you with a total number, but I would say 25, 30 between virtual and,
I can only, I guess I didn't count your side.
I have an attendance record, I apologize, I do have an attendance record back in my office I could get back to, but, so we have at least 20, because we have 10 on the labor side, actually, you weren't fully staffed, so it'd been
No,
eight.
It's 9 from our side.
Nine from labor and 10 from management, and then I had my 2 managers there taking notes. So it was well attended, I guess, but if you would like, I can get back.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and we can add to the record the minutes when we get the attendance sheet at your convenience.
Sounds good.
Follow up?
Chair, if I may, I had several questions, but I just figured I might
Keep going.
just kind of get them out there. So I understand from Mr. Kamuller, sorry if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, that the safety committees would like to have their signature on our document that was listed on page 3 of the presentation, the approval page, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then also, the suggested, I'm seeing that a lot of the suggestions that came out of the February meeting are, appear to be related to mitigation strategies for safety and also personal safety. Some of them being mitigation strategies or requests, and some of them being, let's be proactive in case something does happen. I also heard that earlier, this safety plan is not our only safety plan. So I'm glad that we have our interim general manager here to capture all of this information and determine where the best mitigation strategies should be dealt with based on what we're hearing. And it's very encouraging to me that, again, that we have this much engagement, that we have a plan for continuous engagement through, I believe, March to get these things fleshed out and hopefully signed by the committee. So thank you for engaging us, and I'm glad we had an opportunity to meet again after that February 10th meeting.
Thank
Chair.
you.
Sorry.
No, thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have comments and a question. First, I want to really thank you guys for all the work. I think this has been very important. I really do appreciate that everyone came together to have this meeting last Friday and make some forward progress. I'm really looking forward to the continual updates at the Transportation Committee. We'll be able to take that information and report back to the full council how we're making progress. My one question actually lines up pretty well with Councilmember Chambliss. I think some of these items in this addendum seem to relate more to maybe the safety and security action plan or something like that. Is there an action coming out of your committee meeting saying where some of these things should be relegated? Because almost some of the safety and security action plan are almost like it's a high priority current in the now action plan. And so it seems like some of these things might belong on that list. And so I would like to see how are we going to work those things together so we're actually making progress.
Chair Zelli and Councilmember Barber, absolutely, and one thing I failed to mention as part of the agency safety plan is we have what we call a safety risk registry outside of the agency safety plan that we look at current mitigation strategies, and then we look at what else can we do to mitigate whatever it is. And like Mr. Kamuller said about the infectious diseases, transit worker assaults, those types of things will be on our our safety risk registry, and actually our transit worker assaults is actually already on our safety risk registry.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nancy. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to Councilmember Barber, because I was wondering too, I really appreciate this addendum that you've prepared. But from hearing the presentation, knowing that some of this will go into other areas of safety within the organization. So just so that, but I appreciate that it's enumerated here, and I appreciate that you got that to us before our last meeting. I think that was one of the things that was for me driving my vote to at least delay this by a week, to make sure that members of ATU, really our employees here at the council, have an opportunity to fully engage. And whatever happened in the past is the past. It doesn't matter at this point. We want to make sure that the path forward is solid. So I appreciate that you've got the regular meetings that are taking place on Wednesday through March 9th, and that's a short period of time. Then you mentioned the Thursday meetings that will be taking place. Is that going forward into the future? Is that every Thursday afternoon?
Chair, Councilmember, yes, that is correct. So the weekly Thursday meetings are through March 9th, and then already on the calendar is every third Thursday of the month, and that's indefinitely. I didn't put an end date on it.
Okay, and that was agreed upon by everybody on the committee then, I would assume.
Yes.
Chair, yes, that was.
Okay.
I'm confident should there need to be more, that can be worked out.
Okay, great. And I'll just say, I really applaud you for coming together and putting that schedule together, because I think that was some of the comments that the council had coming into last week's meeting is, okay, what is the path forward? Because it is a living document. And, you know, I know there's pent up demand for our workers to be able to put their thoughts and feelings into this, and especially as it relates to their own safety. I mean, I can't imagine, I am lining up a ride along to go out on operate with an operator on LRT and meet up with PD as it relates to some of the stuff that is taking place on the Blue Line and some of the airport runs that we're taking, but because I do want to see it for myself. I really want to understand better what everybody's going through. But I think it's important too that when incidents occur, and I think Mr. Camilleri, you're referencing this, is that it's an action, it goes on a risk registry, and I understand you're all experts at what you're doing, and safety is very important, and we know that. But, you know, that follow-up for people that have gone through traumatic experiences, the follow-up that we make sure that our operators are being cared for, you know, beyond a moment or two of an incident that's taking place. I know from riders when they're talking about some of the things taking place on our trains, buses too, that it's jarring for them. So imagine doing it every day, and it's the means by which you feed your family and pay your bills and make sure you have a roof over your head. So they don't have options to take a car or do something else that day. This is their job every day. So I want to make sure that this is, you know, really a work in progress that has the highest, utmost level of trust and respect, and that people show up when they need to show up, and if somebody can't show up, find somebody else who can show up, and give it your best, because we have, no pun intended, so much riding on this for all the reasons. Our workforce here at the council, and of course our customers out there and everybody else who depends on us. So I'm really pleased that this extra time was given, that we could at least as a council understand what the path forward is. And you know, I'm also looking forward to the updates. So I know you've got updates going to transportation naturally. I'm going to be requesting we get some of these updates as it relates to things that management would like to know about. I know that we've got several chairs of committees that sit on management, and every now and then, you know, we kind of want to stay in the know of things too. So just be expecting that some of these things, just reports, quarterly reports, whatever they may be. Attendance at the meetings is also important, since that was perhaps an issue in the past. I think just at a higher level, I think management, it'd be good for us to see those too, so that we can keep tracking it and staying on top of some of these things as it relates to the business that we see. So I just want to say thank you to everybody in the room, for taking a pause. I know that was stressful because we need to get this plan approved, and there's a deadline, but it also, I think, is incumbent upon us to make sure that all of the voices that need to be heard are heard in this process, not only for approving the plan that we have before us in version 4, but as we continue to move on. So I appreciate that very much, and will continue to stay very active in monitoring how this moves forward in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bull.
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair. I too am very.
Sorry.
I too am very pleased that everybody was able to come together and work on this. It seemed like up through last Wednesday, people were sort of talking at each other. Now everybody's working together, and that's good to see, because safety is the most important thing. I read through the agency safety plan, and it's a pretty dry, boring document that just kind of has a list of who does what. The important safety stuff is the other work that's in support of that plan. I'm glad to see people coming together to be able to work on that. One thing I do want to push back a little on is in the slide where it talks about the safety management system, it says the formal top-down safety has to be everybody. When somebody comes to you and says, okay, you told us to do it this way, but this way doesn't work, and it's putting us at risk, that's something that management has to listen to and fix so that everybody can be safe and be on the same page as to how to handle things on the job. Because that's the only way that we're gonna have a truly safe workplace, is if we all work together on it and respect our employees when they bring things up that they're concerned about on their jobs. But yes, I'm very glad that everybody came together, and I feel so much better about this week after all of the work that you did, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Bento.
I'll be brief, I promise. Kudos. I wasn't able to be here last week, which is a good thing because no one would have wanted me in the room. I was coughing a little brutally. No COVID though. But I just wanted to second and third and fourth the kudos. I watched the meeting last Wednesday night and I wondered how this could get turned around by tonight, and I'm really impressed. And I think it's because there are two great co-chairs. So thank you both for what you're doing to pull this together. I also want to thank everybody in the room, but I want to thank in particular two people, Council Members Zarin and Councilmember Fredson. You two have been very strong, articulate, determined voices for labor in your role on the Met Council. And as someone who also has a labor background, you push us. And I just want to say thank you. You are going to be missed by this council and the next council. So thank you both for being strong advocates and speaking for the men and women who do the work in this organization.
Any other comments? Well, I think Councilmember Fredson.
Sure, thanks, Chair. I just want to say very grateful for the work that you've put in on this, the partnership. My observation is some unions have really combative relationships with management. Other labor organizations have partnerships. Doesn't mean you always agree, but there is a commitment to, when you're facing challenges, coming together and to resolve problems. And I just fundamentally believe in labor management processes because it forces conversations like this most often kind of behind the scenes, not always in a public forum like this. But I think this council is just seeing, I mean, I can say for this is probably the clearest example of an outcome of positive partnership over a relatively short period of time that I've seen in my time here, and I hope it carries forward in the future. So, and the last thing I would say is that part of the reason why we're here is because of IIJA, and not all parts of the IIJA are complying with IIJA requirements is going to be challenging for a lot of organizations and entities, whether it's business or government. But I think this is an example of it really forcing some positive change. So last night in transportation, we heard about IIJA impacts on, the price of metro mobility vehicles. And the IIJA is, has Buy American provisions and requiring more domestic sourcing of critical minerals for clean energy technology. And all of that stuff is challenging to deal with, but ultimately, I think it's going to force some really positive and necessary change. So, thanks.
Thank you for those comments, and I certainly appreciate this conversation, especially the partnership that you've exhibited and the attention of how we're going forward. So hats off to the team and Ron, Andrew, we are looking forward to inviting you back because we know that there's work ahead of us. And I think Councilmember Fredson said it right. There's almost structural challenges, but also we're serving ourselves. Everybody in this room has such a shared interest to make this work. And for our customers, the experience of where we are bringing our service, our transit services, which we all believe in, we have a ways to go. And we know that, and we'll do that together with the wisdom that's in the room. And so I really appreciate the presentation and really thoughtful comments from the council. Thank you all for getting us to this point where we are today. I think we're ready for a vote, and I'm going to call for that now. So all those, there is a motion that's been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Well, thank you so much. And I think we're moving on and really looking forward to these amendments and the process to make sure that we have engagement and a fruitful outcome. So thank you all. Thank you all that have visited, and you are certainly welcome to less exciting meetings at any time. The meetings that are here in the chamber. We have maybe just a 2-minute break, but we're going to have another item on the agenda to hear about Transitway advancement policy procedure, very important too. So if you're a council member, you're not excused.
Yeah, let's go.
I know.
I know in the interest of everybody's time, we're going to reassemble the meeting, and we have an important information item, the Transitway advancement policy procedures, and we have Nick Thompson, Charles Carlson, I know Bill Walljasper is in the room, so take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Happy to provide an update on an important topic that this body passed in November, but we're continuing to implement the effects of a policy that was implemented. And so today we're going to provide an update on the next steps, a draft modification to the region's transportation policy plan, a overview of the risk process, both on the project level and at the enterprise level, as well as some examples that are underway. To talk about the draft Transitway advancement procedure, so this is the more detailed staff instruction around advancement of this work. So first we'll begin with a summary of the policy as a reminder of what was adopted in November. Really two pieces that are in adopted policy 17. First, as the MPO, the council would require and compare information on aspects of projects to standards that are established in the plan, and that the information that would be required of projects would be detailed in a subsequent plan modification. So now we're at the point of developing that plan modification. We'll talk about it tonight. So the second piece of the policy relates to the implementation and operation role. So when Metro Transit is implementing a transitway, this policy would require the council and local project sponsors to develop a risk register, to establish roles and responsibilities that address those risks, and then to reflect how those risks will be handled in agreements as projects are moving forward. So as a reminder, and this is a slide from the policy adoption process, but this policy was implemented in response to issues and risks that have developed either in the implementation of transitways or subsequent to its implementation in the operation and capital maintenance of these projects. So this has really taken place in two different forums. Within individual projects, there have been implementation challenges. Sometimes community support has varied. Construction challenges have been encountered that have resulted in cost increases that are beyond what was included in project contingency plans. And as that's occurred, we've had undefined roles or expectations for local partners. So that's sort of the project side as projects have been implemented. There's also a broader cumulative enterprise challenge that we've faced as we have more and more transitways in operations. Some of this has related to a lack of definition and roles for project assets, what happens at the end of construction and there's an asset to be maintained. Capital maintenance over time has emerged as a significant financial issue for the region, especially on rail projects. Long-term needs for these projects have not always been defined during the planning and construction phases. And then finally, as we all know, we face a significant operating shortage, and not just in operators, but in other categories of positions that are critical for the success of this system. And having a greater understanding of the operations requirements for these different projects early in the process will help evaluate system level risks as projects continue. So we developed the new policy and the council adopted it in November, really responding to what are the points in the process of developing a transitway that the council approves items. There's so many different decisions, whether it's authorizing an engineering contract, authorizing a different phase of agreements, a real estate purchase. All of those steps feel very individually incremental, but cumulatively they're very significant, and they result in a larger transit system that has many benefits as well as many costs and responsibilities that come with implementing the system. As difficulties have been faced in the past, it is tempting to say, well, we have years to figure that out. There's time to address that next piece. That can defer some of these big decisions, and the challenge is how can we have more information when we're making these decisions early on so that we can make the right decisions and we can enact the right mitigations now to avoid that issue from cropping up later. And so the policy would apply as shown in this slide, really on that implementation role as shown in green when funding agreements with different project funding partners are advancing. That would be the time to address some of those issues that are coming along. The other critical piece on the planning side is anytime a project is being considered for either adoption or amendment in the transportation policy plan, we would be requesting information and evaluating the project at that time as well. And these risks and the evaluation that would occur would not just be for that next phase. It's not just what are the risks in the engineering phase. It'd be considering the risks through all subsequent phases. So that is a quick recap of the policy that the council has adopted. I'll transition now into where we are with the modification of the transportation policy plan, and then Nick will talk about the risk management process. The modification to the 2040 TPP does a handful of things. Really, this is about clarifying information that's required of project sponsors and has always been required of project sponsors. First and foremost, documentation of the Transitway corridor selection process. So the selection report, the documentation of good planning that had gone into the selection and recommendation of a project. Secondly, the resolutions of support from local governments and agencies affected by the project. So understanding a level of support that is received from each body that would be affected. Documenting fiscal constraint. This has always been done. Typically, it's been done for the capital cost to build a project and the operating cost for a project, and the expected revenue sources. This is the plan, not the implementing agreement. The expected revenue sources, are those revenue sources reasonable for the operation as well as the initial construction? The new element, and probably the biggest change from past practice with this plan, is we will now be expecting life cycle cost estimation as part of that, even that early plan step. We would not know enough about these projects when we're bringing them into the plan to have a really detailed capital maintenance plan. That's the product of much more work that happens much later in the process. But we can estimate the life cycle costs of project improvements so that we have a sense of scale for what might be working with over time. And then finally, as before, documentation of public engagement and feedback. What are the community's perspectives on the project? What is the input that project sponsors both sought, but also what were the major items, the themes of feedback from the public, and how, if applicable, have they been incorporated into project planning? So these are the categories. Again, always things that we've expected with the addition of life cycle cost estimation, but now formalizing this in kind of one place that as different bodies, including Metro Transit, are bringing projects forward, we'll have a more useful guide of what goes into the information that the council requires for a plan modification. The schedule for the modification is underway. So in January 25th, we shared this with a partner staff transit planning group. So that has been shared. We welcomed feedback across this month. We continue to get feedback for a few more days from that staff group. We've received some input. There's been some other partner discussion of the modification. I'd say a lot more of the interest has been on the implementing procedure as compared to the plan modification, where we're really just kind of clarifying what's already expected of everybody. In March, we'll be inviting some public input too, as we incorporate any comments from the initial feedback. This would not be a formal public hearing process. That is not required for a TPP modification, but would be for a larger TPP amendment. That's where we'd be making more substantive changes in the plan. Here, we're really listing out what the council will require, so it's a lower level of change. In April, we'd be modifying, or we'd be finalizing the modification and bringing it through the Transportation Advisory Board's subcommittee process. So TAC planning, and then the Technical Advisory Committee, and then the Transportation Advisory Board as an info item. Late in May, we'd be seeking Transportation Committee approval, and then to the full council in the first meeting in June. So at this point, no projects are expecting or slated to need to bring an amendment forward before this mid-year adoption timeline. After the council adopts, or we anticipate the council adopting the modification, the first projects that this would apply to would be Purple Line and the Blue Line extension. So for those projects, they'd be compiling that information, submitting it to the council, and then we'd be sharing it with the governing body as we are considering, and you are considering, whether to modify these projects in the plan. Each of these projects is already in the plan, so it'd be the changes that may be upcoming for both of these projects. The next piece gets into risk management, and I'll turn it over to Nick.
Any questions at this point for Charles? We just covered.
Just-
Sure.
Just briefly, so I appreciate that the life cycle cost estimation will be early in the process. Is there a point in time where that then just, of course, is updating as more and more information come in as it moves throughout the process, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, absolutely. I think this is the earliest phase of it. Maybe more of the what's the useful life of the asset and you know that kind of approach as how that life cycle cost would be estimated. Later in the process, as the project is being implemented and afterwards, it would become a much more detailed capital maintenance plan of on what interval is what kind of capital maintenance required to keep a project in a strong state of good repair.
And Mr. Chair, also the public engagement part, of course, is super important up front. But as we know, even getting a plan ready to be adopted into the plan takes years. So we've known that we can get letters of resolution or support from locals and then elections happen and things change. So that public engagement piece, it's not really a moment in time at the beginning. It's going to be throughout the process demonstrating there's continued support. And, you know, a resolution is great, but as a city council member and mayor for 20 years, resolutions can be undone the next time you get a change in votes on a city council. So I would be hoping that we can't compel or, well, maybe we can compel something that's more binding because, you know, one group of people saying this is great, we're all in, and then a couple years later, we're not so sure, we're backing out. It doesn't help us even in a resolution. So I'd like to see something more on the solidified partnership, whatever that could mean, and I'm not even sure there's a mechanism to do that. And the only other thing I would say is, certainly with all of the things that our region and the world has gone through in the past several years, it'd be nice to know where you can almost, you know, throw the flag, go, we are coming out of, you know, a pandemic and we've got new data and new information, or something drastic has happened where we have more information now, or we have more questions now that really cause us to have to pause in this process where we can't just keep moving along. So I think you've woven that into various points in this where risk occurs, but you know, sometimes we literally have that, could be a flood, could be a tornado, could be a natural disaster or a technological something change that happens. So I'm just wanting to know too that we can have those bigger inflection points as a Met Council or with our partners. Because I think in, you know, the years where we started to do these major transportation projects, we've had good calm years, but now that things are coming at us much faster and we're just seeing times change where people are pivoting all the time, whether it's, you know, where people are working, how people are working, all of that. So I just want to make sure that we've got, as a Met Council, Metro Transit, Met Council, really that opportunity to kind of throw the flag if we need to and take a time out.
John?
Just a quick one comment, and that is that this whole life cycle determinations, I think it's in California, they have legislation where the products have to have adding life cycles. You have to have a life cycle, whether it's your refrigerator or your you know, washer or whatever it is, because people don't, they're buying something at that kind of expense and it's done in 5 years. So I think we better get used to looking at something and having life cycle kind of determinations, or at least the best we can on that.
Good point. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on that, when we were first doing Southwest, there was a lot of discussion about the tracks last 100 years and the cars last 50 years. And we can see from all of the maintenance that we've had to do that that's not the case. That you almost rebuilt the whole thing continually. So clarifying that up front for everybody that's involved in the decision making is the right thing to do.
Yeah, so I'm glad to see that we're moving forward with this TPP modification. And in terms of the process documentation, I think it's important to be consistent in terms of how we engage during the process, and also be consistent with the way that we're documenting, because that will help with our metrics. and seeing if we are improving or not improving. If we have inconsistencies, then there's a greater chance of inequity throughout part of the process. And then also in terms of risks, I did not see anything in here about the level of risk. We know that almost anything that we do is going to have a certain level of risk. So, what is our risk tolerance? What is our risk range? That is also an important factor, because if you take it literally, then we could be focusing in on everything instead of what's within our tolerance range.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is more information about risk range and tolerance levels when you get down further.
Oh, okay.
There's a scale that applies as to what's high and low. Because part of what, I do a lot of risk management in my day job, and so everything comes in with a certain level of severity, and you want to reduce those things because you want to see them go from red to orange to green, and that's part of what that is. If we put in the right mitigation strategies, we have less red.
Yeah, I did read that.
Read ahead. All right, Phil?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. I just wanted with our timeline and such, if either from the information side or from the input side, if maybe the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Equity Advisory Committee would be the good ones to try to, run it by them too, because I think would be good information shared on either side of that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea.
Thank you.
All right, Nick, keep going. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sure we covered this when this was in front of us last fall or winter, whatever it was, but the resolutions that are adopted by the communities, right, does this increases the number of times we need those resolutions all throughout the process, is that right? Or I'm just kind of thinking about the purple line specifically in White Bear Lake and their decision. I'm just curious in terms of future projects, what's the latest that if there's a change in power or sentiment at the local level, they could put a fork in a project that's been in the works for years, if not decades.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fredson, there's a couple different processes that are underway relative to modifying the TPP. It's really at that point of amending the project into the plan that we would seek a current resolution of support from each community. So when a sponsor comes forward with, here's a project, please adopt it, we would look and say, okay, each of these communities has passed this for this current project as it's defined here. On light rail projects, this is more on the implementation side, but on light rail projects, there's also a municipal consent stage. And that is a different process during the implementation side that perhaps Nick will go into, but it's a more formal and non-revocable piece of support during the project design phase. In the case of a resolution like this, it's true that a community could change their mind. That's a risk event that we've encountered on a project. The intent here is not to say that nobody could ever change their mind again, but to, I think recognize that it is a risk that could be encountered during implementation, and then that's more on the risk management side than it is on the TPP side.
Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that point, municipal consent was offered twice on the Green Line extension, so when there was major change, it did come up again, and each community had to take another vote on municipal consent, so it may not even be a one and done.
right.
Yeah, if there's changes to the project, then it may be required again.
Nick?
All right, are you ready? These have been all great questions. I'm glad we could come here tonight because this will influence how we move forward. We thought we'd do a little bit of grounding in the risk process too, because we are both at some level continuing a good practice we have for projects for risk management. But we're adding this new concept called, what we're saying is enterprise level risks, which I know the council, if you've sat on audit or management committee, you've heard about a new enterprise risk process that the council's undertaking that we're going to fold into this process. And so Just to define here a little bit, as we go into a couple of examples, the project risks are really, what are the risks to finish the project, to get it to revenue service? Whereas enterprise risks are both much more longer term. How does this project impact overall things that are happening at the council, the overall network, other issues that maybe the project team is not aware of that the council's leadership is tracking, but really you want to have a better understanding about. And I think that's a little bit of what's been missing in some of the risk process on a couple of these projects in the past. And so that's a very new component of this procedure to projects. And then, the process, it's a discipline. We're not inventing a risk process. We're following best practices that are used in a lot of industries and a lot of practices for projects. So there's a common language and common strategy for that. So the procedure itself that we've drafted, it's still in draft mode, and we've shared it with our local partners that are very interested in the nuts and bolts of this procedure. When we say our local partners, primarily the counties have been the funding local partner. The major cities have added comments though too, so it's not just county comments we're receiving here. And I'll touch on what they're commenting. But the key elements of the procedure are, first of all, it's that two-part. It's the MPO role as the planning agency with the TPP, which Charles has just stated, is basically the procedure will point staff to the TPP once you've modified it, of the requirements of what to follow from a planning standpoint. But then it points to internally to the staff, how do they implement this policy at the project level? So the procedure elements are, number one, that you're required to follow the policy for both developing project and enterprise risks. We want to define a common horizon of risks for all projects. We want some consistency here across projects, common language. So we're saying what are the project risks between now and opening day of the project. And for the enterprise risks, it's between what are the risks between now and the planning horizon that the council is currently operating under, which is 2040 currently, but next year will be 2050. And so just kind of what's that long-term look we need to, and that's really going to be important for capital maintenance risks and financial risks, and also ridership, long-term ridership. So we have a common language for defining what risks they will track, including the type of risk, probability, schedule, how you're going to mitigate that risk, who owns the risk. The owner of a risk does not have to be the council. It can be local partners or others. One thing we definitely want to input on tonight is how often do you want to hear about risks. We are before you in Transportation and Council all the time with business items related to these projects, dozens upon dozens per year. And often the risks don't change that frequently. We are required at the project level, once the Metro Transit is in charge of the project, we are at least, FTA requires at least quarterly updating the risks. Often it's monthly. And we drafted it as we will update the council at a defined cycle, at least annual, but that cycle. What we want to do is separate when we tell you about the risk from when you have to vote on something.
Yeah.
So you're not learning ideally about a risk the day we ask you to approve a contract or move a project to the next phase. So I think that's something we would like input on. I think we annually might be a starting point, but also there's, as we're developing the enterprise risk process that Phil's leading, it might be some sort of triggers that we bring risk to you when they reach some threshold. That's another option. So we're seeking input there. And then how long do we track risks on a project? It's not just, we're assuming we should track it until not just the day we open, maybe beyond that day. We track risks at the project level for FTA until we close the project. Green Line Central Corridor, we opened in 2014. We still haven't closed that project. So we could conceivably do for several years after opening, track that. But it's a process, so how much longer do you want to hear? That's some input we'd like to hear about. Because
Wendy, do you want something written into this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You were asking for input on
Yep.
when you want to hear it. The one that's important to me is when it changes. And whether that's an email or a call or Because a lot of times when something changes, it's because something radical happened that our phone is gonna start ringing. And I don't wanna wait for a meeting to find out.
Risk can change, both, they can get better or worse too.
Well,
And so,
I'm talking about the worst kind.
Yeah, right. So those are some things we'll want to build some consistency in, so our project staff knows. And so we definitely do not want surprises in this process.
And I think, if I could just interject, we've talked also about this idea of having a conversation well before a decision. That this concept is also maybe helpful when you think about a project of where are those points of decisions that are likely, so that calendar is kind of laid out maybe annually.
Yep.
So we'll have a sense like, oh, how do we prepare for anticipating those points? I mean, I guess we all collectively will be doing that. And so when is that discussion of this? Judy, cheers.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's kind of what I was thinking too.
I was reading your mind.
Yeah, thank you. Boy, that's dangerous. No, and to that end, you know, a lot of this goes through management, whether it's contracts, you know, changes to contracts, additional work that needs to be done, or sometimes it's the availability of labor. We're going through labor shortages right now. So for management, I think, you know, after we've had a couple of discussions recently on some related issues, you know, I'd like to have some of this again coming to management on some sort of a regular basis ahead of us also getting pieces of this. And because audit also sits kind of, I think, under management, and I've served on that, and we've got Debs on audit as well, which is great, and others. But, you know, just making sure, because there's, you know, audit is keeping an eye on other kinds of risks at the council and so, and the only last thing I would say is I'd like to see some more regularity in management, whatever that means. And also as far as evaluating risk, when you own something and the project closes, you still gotta keep an eye on risk. I mean, you know, how long is it viable? Should it be changing? What, you know, because it's all ours now, right? So I don't know how risk ever goes away, but you're an expert in the area more than me, but you know, the partners are done and everybody's going like this and, you know, then it's all on us. So that's why I think, especially as it's coming for us to own and operate at one point, you know, the tails are forever until something would be shut down. And so that's really important to me, that risk evaluations continue to happen.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's kind of hard in this abstract form to say how often we want to hear it. I do think if there's a significant change for the worse, for sure. I think until we get to a regular cadence as we're building out this procedure, leaving it somewhat loosely defined as you have it, but maybe coming to us a few times, because it might even be how we hear, how it's reported and how we process, especially when we get to the enterprise risks. I think the project risks, those are pretty well defined, those land with FTA, that's the part that we really know. The part that we're really trying to get a better understanding is that enterprise side. And I think that's figuring out that cadence might take a little while, so I'd err more on the side of somewhat more reporting now versus less.
I think you might have read ahead to the next slide.
I might have read ahead.
There it is.
So there's two kind of things going on here. The policy's in place, so we'd like to start implementing it right away and start operating under enterprise. But the effort that is this enterprise risk process for the council, which is beyond just for Transitways, is underway right now with its own schedule. And I think it's gonna be a very important feed to this process, because there's gonna be a place where enterprise risk lives outside of it. The project directors, project managers, they can manage the project risk very well, but they can't, the enterprise risks have to be separate from that, and it needs a separate process. And that is underway. It's just gonna probably not be fully underway till June. So in the interim, we're proposing that we have some enterprise risks that we present to you, that we know some of them right now. I think we're pretty certain of which ones will end up, because you've asked us about them. So we'll track those as an interim without a really fully developed how the council's gonna develop enterprise risks. But know that they're coming through this process that's been presented at management and audit. We have a consultant on board that's helping us develop that.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
And I think that will be, thank you, Mr. Chair, I think that will be great also, because I think if you bring some examples to, whether it's to committee of the whole or management or transportation, you're gonna get a good feeling for what the risk tolerance level is, because I think those risk rankings are very dependent on project and organization. And that's just been my experience, and I think that you'll get a lot of feedback as to where our comfort is, which will help actual sort of your long-term grading of those risks.
A great example of that, Councilmember, is that, so I think one of the risks at the enterprise level is gonna be around staffing. Okay. That risk is much higher for LRT because we need 200 to 300 new positions for that versus in ABOT, which we opened D-line with 9 new positions. The risk is the same, but you're gonna rank it much lower at the enterprise level for the D-line than you would for Blue Line extension. So it's a good example where we'll need some kind of, different projects will have the same enterprise risk, but different rankings of those risks or ratings. So the risk register some of you I see have grabbed a risk register from the purple line. It was a one page of many that developed. I just want to walk through. We just went through a very rigorous risk process for purple line. That is what we do on each project. So I wanted to use that as an example. It's a process that meets FTA requirements. Is very collaborative with our partners and experts that any risk can be. So it's a staff-driven at this point. So it's all the project staff, funding staff. It's the city's staff from the cities that the project is in. It's our experts in operations, maintenance, engineering that are within the organization, and some key consultants. They sit in a process that often is a couple days long, where we go through every single risk we can think of on a project, create a risk register, and then that becomes what we maintain on this quarterly or more frequent basis. We walk through the project. We have a lot of the engineering details so we can think about risks. The risk can be any type of risk. So for Purple Line, we started with like 70, and we now currently have 132 risks after that. These are risks, just project risks to get to opening day. And we also retired a bunch of risks. There's a bunch of risks that were there that were retired. 132 seems like a big number, but it's not. There's hundreds of risks. And a lot of these are very low probability risks, but it's an example of every single risk gets assigned an owner, a backup owner, that's a person or an agency. They are required to develop a mitigation strategy to reduce the level of that risk or to even get it to retirement of that risk. And then we have a scale that we apply the same to all of them about what is the probability that that risk will occur, what's the cost or schedule impact of that risk, and then that results in ranking of the risk from low to high, very high. And it's what FDA says, tell us about the high ranked ones. That's what they want to really hear. What's changing? That's what we're reporting, and I think that's the type of information. And what are the big ones and what's changed, both good and bad.
So if this is an example, this is just page 1?
Page 1 of 8.
Okay.
For Purple Line.
I got it.
And Mr. Chair, I saw the somewhat panic on your face and Councilmember Ventos when the word 132 risks come up. I do this for the medical device industry, the same sort of thing for medical devices. You think of anything that could go wrong, so you're mitigating everything. It's a big list, and you really want us to have them all fixed.
Yeah.
I mean, example, we acquire a lot of right-of-way in these Transitway projects. We want each parcel that we're evaluated at the risk level, not just overall, because each parcel can have a different ownership structure, relocation risk, all of these different things. So it can add up.
And it's not just the color, I imagine. Some risks are material to the project, and others are like, we can accept.
Yep, accept, monitor.
But Mr. Chair, I mean, ultimately the process is you start to get to a point of a risk-benefit analysis, and you go, okay, we've mitigated everything enough, and now we're comfortable with where we're at. Right, that's ultimately where you go.
Why it's important to FTA is this kind of sets your contingency financial. So you want to manage these risks as well to keep your contingency at a reasonable level, and the local funding partners are very interested in that contingency level. And sometimes on projects we've had the contingency not high enough. one particular project. But, these risks are what drive that contingency level. The scale.
I have a very urgent question. Item 41, under the risk description and permits, it says county and St. Paul for geotechnical and sewer. That isn't referring to the council member that represents the purple line, is it?
I don't believe you came up with some risk.
Oh, good. I mean, I would understand if I did, but. Sorry, Matt.
Councilmember, do you think we should add you as a risk?
Yeah, I would. Red.
The one thing, there's a risk in sharing risks. I want people to realize that, and how we describe risks on that paper. This public documents, we know there's political risks, there's personal risks. We have to describe it in a way we can track it. We also have to be sensitive to the fact that risks, they get shared in the public, and somebody who's not maybe tracking might see a high risk that to us we think we can manage and might overreact to how we've displayed that risk if we don't properly manage how we're portraying the risk and what our mitigation can do for that risk.
Mr. Chair, I really like that you said that, Nick. Serving on the Purple Line PAC, I remember sitting at meetings and all sorts of assurances were being given that we would have electric buses and that everything would be just perfect. And then COVID hit, and then we started dealing with issues related to employee, recruitment, and it was like, we can't make promises we can't keep. And I really like the integrity of these kinds of documents. I think they're really important to us as an organization, and frankly, to the tax-paying public and the people we're trying to serve. So, thank you. It's a lot of work, but it's good.
So we've kind of walked through the handout. I don't know if there's any other questions on that. I knew you wouldn't be able to read it on the slides. So enterprise risk, I wanted to just give an example of what we've developed for Blue Line Extension. This has been one we developed with our project partners. Kind of trying to find a level of information that we could share with you. So describing what we thought is we could describe what the risk is, category of risk, financial, operational, it could be organizational. But one of the big things is we know there's a risk, like risk one is about funding. There's not enough funding to cover the new operating cost of the Blue Line Extension. Right now there isn't. But there's legislation proposed right now that could, by May, might have reduced that risk. The thing we want to convey in enterprise risk, which is very new, is like when we need to resolve some of these risks before moving forward. And we want to telegraph that as much as we can. We don't need operating funding for the Blue Line Extension maybe for 5 or more years. But do you want to enter construction if you haven't solved that risk? That's kind of the level of discussion I think the enterprise risks are introducing that we haven't necessarily always had in the past. And that's a big change in this policy and procedure that we're hoping that, we can tell you that here's a big enterprise risk, here's when we think there needs to be a solution. And like funding solution is one that is an outside process that's going to solve that. It's not a vote the council can necessarily take to add new operating funding to the system. It's a state source or a local source.
Yeah, Judy?
And to that, project by project, financial here, but it can be cumulative. Because, we were just doing Green Line for a while and then Green Line Extension, and now we've got a lot coming at us now. I keep hearing that. So it's cumulative. So while we might be able to solve for one, or at least think we can, if it's cumulative, and so how do you factor cumulative impact into each project?
So, great Chair, Councilmember, that's a great question. So what we're anticipating that there is going to be for each project, there's going to be a question about its new operating costs, its capital maintenance, its number of positions, new positions, its ridership. So we're building out the model of each of those answers to each of those risk areas for every project. and then by building that out, we can tell you about the cumulative impact. Because that's the big enterprise level. We opened Orange Line we didn't have enough operators, but we opened it. We just didn't open it at the service level we want. But the amount of work we have coming through the pipeline, you need to see that cumulative number. So we're building those. We have the operating forecast for each line that we can bring the total, like by 2028 when we know which lines are gonna open, what the new operating, we can bring that answers to that. And then then we have to decide how big a risk is that. Is it very high? Probably. So I think we have that cumulative information we're building to answer those type of questions.
And Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, because we don't know what we don't know yet, but as the information comes in on funding and then we plug it in. But, well, and I suppose every line is getting its own designated funding, but the operators, the drivers, all of that's on us. So, at some point, how then you have 5 projects in front of you, you've done an evaluative risk on each and then the cumulative, and so we have maybe 60% of the funding that we need to do something. How do we evaluate, well, which moves ahead and which doesn't? Who gets their line and who doesn't? And do some get their full service, or does everybody have to do a cutback? I mean, that's gonna be art and science, I would only imagine.
Yeah, Chair, Councilmember, what this risk process does is expose the risk to you. It doesn't, to help inform what decisions have to be made, but it doesn't solve that risk.
Right.
But it definitely daylights that risk. It makes the decision before you have to make some certain decision about a project to move to its next phase.
Robert and.
I'll defer to Deb if you have something on this.
Okay,
It's related to this.
Yeah, it is. So just as I was talking, you get to a point in risk management where you do your risk benefit analysis and the benefits outweigh the risk. There also might be a point where the risks are not acceptable and you're requiring additional information. It's up to them to provide us information, but it's up to us to make those decisions as to whether a project has met an acceptable risk level to move on at that particular point in time. That is what the procedure was really designed to do.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for that, Deb. You always put good clarity for me around these things.
It's my dorky science brain, sorry.
Thank you. No, it's really good. And so, I just want to be real here in the world of risk, because we all do it every day whether we know it or not. But we might have to just say no.
Right.
I mean, and that's the part that is going to be hard, depending on how long a project or, in the planning phase or now we get it and it's implementing. But we have to know what we need to know to make those decisions, as you're saying. And so I think the fact that you're getting this out there with our partners so that they're starting to really understand the importance of what this is for everybody. Because I think to the point you were making, we can't promise things that we can't deliver. And now I think with the experience we've had on some of the lines that we've run, good, bad, or indifferent, we're learning along the way. You guys are experts at it, but I just want to be clear. It could mean that we say yes, but it could mean that we say no. And I don't know how far and how much money gets spent into a project, and if it gets a no, that I just hope we can mitigate the risk as early as possible with the information needed, so that people aren't spending money, and then all of a sudden, and it shouldn't be an all of a sudden. It should be, hey, we are not able to mitigate this serious risk, and then what? We know with Southwest, we've got risk and we're mitigating and we're doing, but at 75% it's gonna move forward because the risk of not doing it is even greater. So we don't wanna have to find ourselves in that situation, because the risk of not doing things exists as well, is all I'm trying to say.
Chair, before the next question, I want to highlight that what I think this policy does, what I hope it does, is it allows you to also, when we bring you the risks, and we say this risk has to be mitigated 2 years out before we enter construction, for example, that you as a council can tell us, well, unless it's mitigated, we're not gonna, we're not gonna move it to construction. I think that'd be of value to our partners too.
Yeah.
Because it's not saying no, it's not being surprising with a no.
Right.
It's giving these are the conditions we're gonna have to resolve in the next 2 years before they can move to that. And I think that's an important part what we want to communicate in this policy, and I think that was part of the intent.
And I would only just add, I know our partners are great, we work really hard with our counties and the locals, and it has to start there. I think this is important because everybody's got skin in the game, and it can't just be on Met Council to solve, and it can't just be on Met Council to figure out, and it can't be, Met Council's problems we're unearthing. We're trying to figure out on behalf of the region how we can do this in a way that is sound with good judgment, and then applying taxpayers' dollars into these. And I'm just telling you, I really appreciate this, because it's gonna be a huge tool for policymakers.
It's a real change, by amplifying existing procedures, but it's putting clarity around it. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
you were
thanks, Chair.
patient.
Thanks, Chair. And I agree. And my points have kind of been made, but I just want to kind of lift up a couple of things. And one is that it's not just us that needs to make these decisions, right? I mean, I think I remember saying at TAB a million years ago as we were amending projects into the TPP or something. And I said, the local government communities develop these projects, they give them to us, we vote them in, and then we love them as if they were our very own. I think I said, and that's how it's happened. And so you're right, this is a change, and I'm really excited about the sort of systemic pieces that can change as well. And we're not the only ones that fund, we don't have the funding for these. And so I just feel like this is a great tool of transparency to hold up to local communities or the state or other places, the feds, where there are funding responsibilities. And I think this shows that we're doing our due diligence, and that may mean having to say no at certain times. And I'm gonna hop back to Charles' part for just a minute, and it kind of relates to this as we do the local resolutions of support, and of course we have the municipal consent, which is sort of the powerhouse level. But it makes you wonder if there aren't also other things, and Judy, you said this, you don't know what the mechanism is or something, and maybe it's not in our ecosystem yet, but the mechanism that we would have to, it's not a point of no return. Things change in local communities, politics can change, but that to me is a huge risk. And so is there a tool out there, where through our own policies and our own authorities, create a stronger commitment earlier on from local communities? Thanks.
Yeah, Riva and Suleiman.
Yeah, so, some of our projects are smaller than others. I think if you have a large-scale project, there are going to be inherent challenges with a larger scale project, or especially if there's a lot of moving parts. So some risks are inherent with certain types of projects, and that's where I guess that risk scale comes into play, and the size of the project may impact that. And then for the enterprise strategy, I'm looking on page 13 where we've got the different risk responses. If we have an enterprise risk, might we have our own enterprise strategy that would include a risk response for commitment or responsibility or expectations?
Chair, Councilmember, yeah, I believe the process that is working its way through now will have its own strategy. This is what we develop at the project level. It does not bind you to, at the enterprise, I think that's totally open to what your strategies are. And then ideally be consistent across any risk that those strategies work for those. But the enterprise, I think that's gotta be developed, and yeah.
Yeah, I think it, obviously this is kind of just the base that we're being given, and we're kind of reflecting and giving you information on how we're receiving this. But I think there's certain large-scale projects where if we have all the information on the level of risks and we understand what the costs are and how much time it's going to take and what some of the political or other challenges might be, we may still decide to go on and take that risk, because we know if you're going to have, these kind of challenges over 40 years, if you just are afraid, of risk, and have a low risk tolerance, you would not embark on a large project. And so we are going to take on that amount of risk just because of the types of some of the types of projects that we're working on. But knowing that and addressing that makes it like, it makes it seem like we're being more responsible in how we move forward.
Molly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that there is risk in being very public and people misunderstanding or overreacting to a high-risk thing that may not be that high risk as it's. I think there's an important point of balance, and I don't know what it is, but I think for our partners and for the public to understand that this is a partnership, that this is not on the Met Council. I mean, we are the easiest target, and we are the one who is always, wow, look at this. They went this far, they spent this much public money, and then they pulled the plug. It's always they being us. And, you know, I think with the Green Line extension issues that on funding that we run into, the general public is like astounded that you mean you didn't know who was going to pay for this before you entered into it. You didn't know these things. So I think that there is a balance in also educating our public that this is not all on the Met Council, that we are in this as partners, and if in fact there are issues that are serious, that it's understood that we are trying to mitigate them, but that it is not all on the council. So I think there has to be a careful look at how we put it out there and to whom, so that there is a broader understanding that we are one piece of the puzzle. We are not the whole bad guy in all of this, or the whole good guy for that matter. You know, they are partnerships.
Right. Sue?
I think it's been 23 years since the Purple Line first started. And I think, you know, it's obvious, we've talked about it, but I just want to highlight that time is a huge risk.
Yeah.
And in those 23 years, you just look at technology alone and the role that has played both positively and negatively as it relates to the Purple Line. You take a look at news organizations and the lack of community newspapers, the loss of community newspapers that has occurred in many communities, particularly in the East Metro area, over those 23 years. You look at the political turnover, which has been mentioned numerous times at numerous meetings. But if there's any way, and this is not the time or place to dig into this, but if there's any way of looking with the partners at what's a reasonable amount of time for us to have for planning these projects and moving them forward. I don't think any of us would ever want to do another 23-year project, I hope to God. Because you just look at the changes on the Met Council over those 23 years, and how many different council members have represented those areas of the Purple Line. So I think time is a real big one that at some point we need to talk about. The other piece is, I'm wondering right now, have you two had an opportunity to present this information to the legislative committees? Is it appropriate to be, I'm just curious.
Chair, Councilmember, we haven't yet, but I think we're going to have an opportunity. You know, we have some hearings. I would expect this will come up in the next. So yes.
I'll be real curious to hear feedback.
And we have shared with them the adoption of the policy. I think
Right.
they were part of the group that we definitely communicated
Right.
that and then why we're doing that policy. So they're aware of that.
It may not be the full PowerPoint, but the
Right.
fact that we are actually taking a shift in how we kind of enter into projects, how we oversee this portfolio, how we think about it, that absolutely will be addressed at hearings. And I can think of a couple of different hearings that will be interesting. Chris?
Thanks, Chair. What other regions have this intensive risk?
Chair,
Meter.
Councilman, anybody developing these projects has the project risk. So they're pretty confident. There's a good state of practice out there because FTA requires it. This enterprise level, as it brings it down to transit, I would guess is fairly new. Enterprise risk in the corporations is not a new concept, but this, the way we're applying it here, I think is pretty new for transit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're getting close to done, so I got a couple questions or comments in general, if you don't mind. I'd say, yeah, it's probably not as common in the public sector, but it's very common. This is common language, common in any kind of, especially building projects and that type of thing, and product development, which this really falls under. First, to with Molly's comments about partners, and I think Nick spelled it out pretty clearly early on, that risk can be assigned to other entities, and that has to be something that's real, or it could be a shared risk. You know, we need to call those things out, and I think that just helps us with messaging down the road. I also, you know, in my mind, just looking at the examples that are on the table, and Nick has heard me say this, I think the COVID numbers and the questions about ridership should be elevated and mitigation moved in a little bit, because that one really makes me nervous because we don't completely know. And then to Robert's comment, love them as if they are your very own. My goal with helping frame all of this is that we don't end up with a whole bunch of unruly teenagers at the same time. So, and yeah, because we do want to love them as their very own.
Yes,
But I do want to thank Nick and Charles, and actually all of you. This is the kind of discussion I think they were looking for. I know they've got a couple more slides, but you know, I'll let them get to it. But this is really the kind of feedback that they wanted. So I'll
let you get to your slides.
I gotta address the ridership slide. First. How we're thinking, I just want to say how we're thinking about, because that's the most valid. Transit is at this point, that's a super unknown point, which means there's a lot of risk. And the detriment that projects have is they're required to use a model to forecast ridership, because they have to forecast out to 2040. And right now that model's stuck in the time before COVID. It will be updated this year, which is great. So we're starting slowly, but we want to bring ridership risk to you before that model's updated. So the way we've been thinking about it is not to give you the numbers of the old model, but to talk about the model said these type of people will be riding this Transitway when it opens. And here's what we know about those type of trips. These are all type of trips that we are not on the system seeing a reduction in trips. Or if the model showed there's a lot of downtown-based commuter trips in the ridership, well, that's a bigger risk than if it's like, you know, D-Line just opened. We're already at ridership on D-Line in January above pre-COVID numbers for 1 month. So because the mix of ridership on that line is one that was less impacted by COVID. So we'll be able to tell you the type of riders and let you make a judgment about how good that old model is until we have a new model update. But I'm pretty confident after the model gets updated this year, we'll be talking about post-COVID better in the modeling. But there's still so much unknown there. We just want to provide you information to let you judge where you think that risk is for that. So, and it's different by project.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Just on ridership too, and let's just be honest, safety is an issue right now, and we are working on safety. We will get the numbers that we need in Metro Transit PD, and hopefully the legislature will be good to us this session and give us some of the extra things that we're asking for that will help us as it relates to some of our safety plans. But we have to admit too that until we really get it figured out, there are people that will not ride because they're afraid to. And that doesn't have to be a forever thing, but man, does it stick, right?
It doesn't change overnight.
It doesn't change overnight, and it's generational. I'm not riding it, and I don't want my college kid to ride it, and I don't want you to ride it. And some of these people are fortunate because they have other options. And so, and then some people don't have other options. So I just hope that it's not just, and I know you guys know this, but I'm just needing to say the problem's exacerbated because of the crime and the issues that are taking place on our transit system, on top of COVID-related work from home and all of that stuff, and we have to somehow acknowledge that. And I don't know how long that will last on top of everything, and hopefully it's not too long, but it's a big deal. I know, and you all know, but especially if you've served in local government, the number one thing that you do as a local official is make sure your community is safe, because everything is built on that. You're not gonna get new businesses, you're not gonna have people moving to neighborhoods, you aren't gonna build parks where people feel good about going. In the environment and everything, it's all built on public safety, which is why it's usually the biggest piece of a budget within a local government's annual levy. So I'm just saying that because, you know, that's where it's actually, it's a good time to be a Met Council member because we can take all of these challenges, and I know we're all optimists and we all wanna roll up our sleeves and we're all doing it all the way through the council, but think about how it impacts everything that we're talking about that'll now impact our 2050 plans. And it's because we're in a moment of time of stuff that we didn't know was gonna happen to us just a few years ago. And the fact that we've gone through this, you know, maybe we'll be better prepared for those unknowns coming at us in the future, because they can. So I just wanna say that, you know, there's layers of why people aren't doing what they're doing.
Chair and council member, before I move, that's a great, clearly safety is an enterprise risk that needs to be on here. The question will be, you know, what is it when we open the line, you know, do we feel will mitigate that risk to a lower level or not? And that's the kind of the discussion. What are the strategies? And you know, this is a blue line example. So, do we feel we'll be able to reduce that safety-related risk, whatever that definition is?
Delaying the green line was a great mitigation.
Right. Just two more slides. I want to share, we have been getting local input. I wanted to highlight a few things that they've stated. You know, this is new to them too, so they're asked several questions about it. You know, one thing that's interesting, they ask, well, what are you going to have risks about not building the project? You know, that's a valid question that I think we need to talk about. You know, these projects are being built for climate goals, for equity goals, and if you don't build them, you know, what risk does that introduce? And I think that was a really good point that we need to consider. A lot of interest in who decides these enterprise risks. What role do we as local partners have in saying that? But these are enterprise, the enterprise in the enterprise is the council. They have their own enterprise risk of a funding partner, and so, but they, you know, we do not want to surprise, we're not going to surprise them with any risk rating. We're going to collaboratively develop and share this with them. And we don't have the structure of how the enterprise risks are going to be set yet. I think that process that Phil's leading will help establish and answer that question better. And then that last one's a big question, is like, if we meet as a local funding partner, we meet the purpose and need of the project, we clear all the environmental, we provide all the funding, can this prevent the project from moving forward? Prior to this, you know, that process was just a pipeline. We met it, we built it, we opened it, so.
And what they're saying is, in the past, they've met every one of their
Yes.
obligations.
Go ahead.
So, and that's definitely the new question here.
Guess what? There's other factors.
Right.
They had nothing to do.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, oh, I'm sorry,
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Frida.
thank you. So, I mean, I think this partnership will definitely help us solve the problems better, because if our county partners are dealing with human service issues or homelessness or some of the others that, issues that our customers are bringing with them, then they can solution that and also prepare to help resolve those issues as we're or during the planning and development process. But without those partnerships, you know, you're looking at one side of the picture. We need to look at both sides of the picture, you know, what's going on socially with our customers who are coming onto our vehicles with some challenges or conduct issues or whatever it is that's happening. So I think there's just so many good ways that we can look at having this Transitway program in place to help us to solution together.
I know we're going over
Last slide.
time a little.
Let's go, yeah.
Okay, so we're playing a little catch up because we have a lot of projects in the pipeline. Ideally, this process of policy would be before project developed, but we're catching up. So we anticipate that our next big thing is the council will be asked to approve the engineering contracts and blue line extension. in March. I said we wanted to separate out the risks, so we aren't bringing them to you the same night as transportation. So we thought the next transportation meeting, we bring the Blue Line risks, Blue Line extension risks to the transportation as an info item. Followed by that, we'd be a couple weeks later asking for approval of the engineering contracts. And we've tried to set up a place where we can catch up on every project. And so we think there's a lot of opportunities this spring where there's actions that you're gonna vote on that we would bring an info, some sort of project risk and enterprise risk as we currently think about it, to present to you through at least Transportation Committee or other avenues. And so those are the different avenues, each of those projects. Purple Line is a big one we've heard a lot about. There's gonna be a public input period for Purple Line's new alignment this spring, and that's normally when we come to the council for an info item about what options are being considered, so we bring the risks at that time for Purple Line. Gold Line is a little bit ahead because we're about to approve the FFGA, but we still have we would definitely want to talk about ridership risk with Gold Line, staffing levels and those things, and there's an opportunity. And then as Charles mentioned earlier, we will have if on the current path, a TPP amendment for Purple Line, if there's a new alignment, and then a TPP amendment for Blue Line extension sometime, probably with the 2050 TPP, because that does have a new alignment for sure. And so there's gonna be some opportunities for every project. And so this will start coming up pretty fast here in the next couple of months. But knowing the enterprise is the least developed part of this, and we still have opportunity to change how we're presenting information to you, how often we are, what the escalation is. I think, we're still in draft mode, so we will, I think, learn a little bit over the next couple of months.
This calendar is really the key.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Chair, what did you say?
It's really the key thing for us to focus okay, we got some work and it's real. Yeah, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment, especially just because the process is trying to catch up, the risk process is trying to catch up with where we are with all the projects. And so with the Blue Line extension and engineering contracts, what's the value of that? I know it's not funds that the council's paying, but approximately.
It's non-public at this point,
Okay, sorry.
but it's very large.
Okay, so then my request, and I don't know if there's a way to do this, but maybe think about how there might be a way to do this, because this process is kind of overlapping. Is there a way to break it into smaller chunks that we can evaluate it until the risk process catches up with it?
Yeah, we will look at that this week.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just jumping off of that. So it'll go to transportation for Blue Line when? The date?
The next transportation, we bring an info item about the risks is what we think we could be ready for that. And then after that.
And the date is?
Yeah,
February 27th.
Yeah.
And then it would come to the council, the date?
The info item?
Yeah.
Well, that's the process question. Do we bring, where do we bring the enterprise
Let me
risks?
ask, I'll tell you why I'm asking. We have a new council coming.
Right, I know.
Right? So I'm
That's
just
a
trying
lot.
to figure, this is big, because even some of us are real veterans here, but now we're all veterans. And it takes a while to, and if you've served on the transit policy making group, you've even got some more insights into this, which I'm very grateful I've been able to do that. And I'd also like to just that's why we need to catch up, is because the locals are spending money, and we don't want them to do that for nothing if there's big risks that are gonna bubble up. And I also wanna just say that, there are mode options here too, and I don't know if a risk seems too big with one mode, it's still a transitway, they all start as a transitway, so I just wanna know, not tonight, but, so that we don't overreact and overcorrect, because we know we need to get transit in these transitways in these corridors, because there's support for it, at least we believe there will continue to be in most of these. So I'm just trying to thread the needle very carefully here, because managing expectations and managing taxpayer dollars in this process is critically important. So that's why I appreciate if we can break it into smaller chunks. And then when these eventually get into the TPP, that's one thing, but how do we evaluate stuff that's and I think you touched on it, but stuff that's in the TPP where we haven't done risk analysis on to this level, but it's already in there. So I'll just leave it at that,
Yeah.
more to come, right?
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
timing for us in the next month is super important because I don't know how many
And
people will be
signing
sitting
the
here
engineering
going, what are we
contract,
doing?
that
You
seems
know?
like, that's just business as usual,
Yeah.
because that's what it costs. But if you do is, you step back, that's a huge deal. Did you have more slides? 10 minutes,
I think we're done.
You done? Okay.
I think we could probably talk for a long.
You know what, we could keep talking, and guess what, we're going to. And a really good point, that we're changing the council, and a number of us hopefully are gonna compete, but.
And Mr. Chair, do we all know, at least, we don't know what the governor's gonna do, but are we all gonna be able to make whatever the council meeting is so that we aren't shorthanded at that meeting with, you know, I mean, that's, when you know you have a big item coming. All of our meetings, we all wanna be there, right? But when you have a big item coming, you try to make sure as many people can
Well,
be there
we're
as
gonna be
possible.
discussing the risks in February, so that's, when's that?
At transportation.
Just only
And transportation, I got it.
Yeah, so would not come back to full council probably till the second half of March, because I assume as maybe info mid-March,
I missed, which project are we talking about?
the blue one.
Oh,
It's, the dates have been moving, so.
yes, we got a map,
yes,
we have some
yes.
options, we'll map it out.
It had been split between
Yeah.
council now and council
And I-
later, so
And
we're
I just
changing
know it's a
that.
big vacation month for people and like, yeah, don't go on vacation, so.
Yes, Mom.
I'm just saying, like, if you're, you know, project
Take a
partners,
weekend.
you hope everybody's showing up for this stuff, so.
All right, any other closing thoughts? Thank you all for staying a little bit later. Nick, Charles, excellent
Yeah.
presentation. And I just really think we have a policy, we're putting more flesh on it. And now it's like, okay, we're really implementing something. Like, this is all about how are we gonna implement this? And this is not just a staff issue, it really comes to us.
I think we did.
I think, I'll just say, I think people are, as complex as it is, we're thrilled, we're at CAD.
Yes.
So I think everybody's like, nodding their head.
Why didn't we do it before?
Yes.
Exactly, well.
Oh, we learned a little bit on one of our alliance recently.
So easy to say.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone, we're gonna see you soon. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.